Thank you for listening to the BjjBrick Podcast. We'll be bringing you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and good times. We hope to flatten your Jiu-Jitsu learning curve, help you get the most out of your grappling ability, and meet your goals both on and off the mat.
Welcome back, my friends. I'm Joe Thomas. I'm here with my good buddy Byron Big Baller Jabara and Good Time Gary. Wait a minute. Stop. Break. That's our other podcast. Welcome back, my friends. I'm Joe Thomas. I'm here with my good buddies Byron Jabara and Gary Hall. This is the BjjBrick Podcast. This is episode 349. We don't have an interview per se for this episode. Byron and I got together with fellow podcasters from the Bjj Campaign, Jeff and Phil, and we discussed kind of the transitional period from white belt to blue belt. So stick around for that. I think everybody can learn something. But let's start with a quote. Experience is that marvelous thing that enables you to recognize a mistake when you make it again. Franklin P. Jones. Yeah, this is directly related to jiu-jitsu. I'm not even going to do an off-the-mat version of this. I'm just going to take this right on the mats. And at first it seems like, well, what do you mean you recognize a mistake once you've already made it? It's too late then. But in jiu-jitsu, I think you make mistakes and you start to recognize them a little bit earlier and a little bit earlier. And eventually you start to recognize them when there's still time to recover from that mistake. And then you start to recognize when the mistake is about to happen. And I think that is what experience is. You just start to recognize earlier and earlier and earlier. And pretty soon you recognize when the tendency comes up to make the mistake and you do something different. I experienced this in a microcosm. One time I was training in Brazil. I just started training again. And the black belt I was training with, and I was a white belt, he didn't speak much English. And he got me in a flower sweep right off the bat. We were doing training from closed guard. And then he hit it again. And then the next time he hit it, right before the sweep, he paused. And I thought, oh, here's my chance. So I posted the wrong leg out. I posted a leg out to try and get leverage to pull my arm free. Of course, he just grabbed that leg and used it as a lever, and he did the sweep again. And then the next time he paused again. I was smart enough not to put that leg out. I tried something else, and he countered that. And this went on for like a 10-minute roll. and you see where I'm going. I made mistake after mistake after mistake, but I started to catch it a little earlier and a little earlier. And I probably learned as much in that 10-minute roll with no conversation as in any other 10-minute roll with a lecture or some advice afterwards. It was just, to me, a brilliant way to teach jiu-jitsu and a good example of how you recognize the mistake when you make it again and again and again.
Yeah, and Joe, just on that one, there was a language barrier there, right? I mean,
yes, he spoke very little English.
Okay, that's cool. That's a good way to teach.
Joe only spoke French at that time, so
it was a real mess.
I do like this quote, and this episode with BjJ Campaign, we do thank them for hopping on here, and you could find I think they're in this episode as well, or this kind of discussion. But we talk about blue belts. We talk about ourselves as blue belts and experiences that we have and had and that sort of thing. And this reminds me of a blue belt experience that I had at a tournament. So the quote, experience is a marvelous thing that enables you to recognize a mistake you made when you make it again. So I was at a tournament. I'm trying to pass this guy's guard. I stand up, and he sweeps me with a pretty simple sweep. I end up on my back and fight back, and I end up again on the top position. I stand up again. He does the exact same sweep. And just as he hit it the first time, I thought, oh man, that was a good sweep. As he hit the second time, I'm thinking, I can't believe he did it to me twice. and so it's kind of nice to get hit with a sweep like that instead of a submission like that, because it's only happened once as a submission. But when I got back to my gym and we were training, definitely that sweep was on the list of things to learn how to deal with. So that story about me getting swept by the same sweep twice in the same match, it definitely was a mistake I recognized as it was happening. I was just shocked. I couldn't believe that I fell for it again, and it wasn't a particularly confusing sweep. I was aware of the sweep, he just had a lightning fast trigger on that, and it was good, but it was mistakes I had made, and when my mistake matches up against something he was good at, happened twice, and found that and fixed it. But yeah.
Kind of, first of all, you say experience is a marvelous thing, that it enables you to recognize a mistake when you make it again. For me, that was my coach. Every time I made a mistake, my coach would yell at me and hit me with a stick, and always scared me. At work, it's my boss telling me I made the mistake again. But I think when I first started, you guys were talking about blue belt days. Let's go back to white belt days. I'd make a mistake, and I'd kind of like what Joe was saying. I'd make a mistake over and over again. A lot of times I don't even know if I recognized the mistake. Like let's say Joe was getting swept over and over again. I guess because you're getting swept, you recognize it when you end up, going from top to bottom. But do you realize what you did wrong? And that happened to me a lot. Is I would just do the same thing over and over again. And we didn't have a lot of higher level people, 18 years ago. There wasn't a lot of online stuff, wasn't a lot of higher level people. Our instructor was Johnny a blue or a purple belt?
He was purple. He was a purple belt, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I just kept making the same mistakes over and over again, and really probably too many times, and I didn't realize what I was doing. And, so I don't even know if I recognized it. And, as I got more into the game and better, I started to recognize the mistakes. But, I was a very slow learner, and I think it took me longer than most people.
Hey, guys, I'm going to call an audible here. So during this interview portion or the discussion portion, Gary couldn't make it. He was working or doing something. We don't really know what he's doing. He's not here. He's got a whole another life of criminal activity, and who knows? Anyway,
actually, I was at my tiger zoo. I got a partner.
You got a partner. So after this, when we air this, let's we have if you're new to the podcast, every episode we talk about an article of the week. We're going to scrap that, and we're going to ask Gary a couple of the questions that we were asking each other about the white belt and blue belt transition and that sort of thing. That way he could participate a little bit in that as well, because I think your input will be valuable in this as well. And that's kind of the theme of the episode, is us as blue belts, us as late white belts, and kind of that time period. And what do you think, Joe?
I hope you remember what we talked about, because I threw my notes away. But
yeah, we're good to go.
We can come up with a few questions.
I've got the notes right
Gary
here.
Into this. Perfect.
I've still got my notes. If you saw my desk, you would
questions up.
So before we do that, I want to bring in an off the mat lesson real quick, and it's interesting. So every episode we like the article, we have a off the mat topic or maybe an on the mat topic, and then we'll take it to the other one. So in this one, I have an off the mat thing that happened, and then I'm going to bring it into jiu-jitsu world. I was at the fire station. That's where I work, and we were watching the news, and they were showing nurses after nurses having extremely rough days with the virus, and they were at risk, and some of them were getting the virus, and some of them were quitting, and that bothered me. That here we need nurses as like more now than ever, and some of them are just quitting. And they interviewed one, and she said, "This is not what I signed up for. I have to quit. This is not why I'm a nurse." And it was, I can't believe that's my response. I can't believe she's quitting now when we need her more than ever. And that was the discussion around the fire table. These things we discuss, we solve all the world's problems. and one of the other guys said she didn't sign up for that. She signed up to be a nurse. She signed up for very little risk to her own well-being. She signed up to help take care of patients. the things she signed up for, she's going to see, some patients pass away. She's going to be doing different work that I wouldn't want to do. But it's true. She didn't sign up for a risky job, and she was going into the hospital, and she will likely get COVID-19. And when he said that, I knew I was wrong. It was like, it's interesting to, people debate stuff all the time, and it's rarely somebody's like, "Yep, I'm wrong." you changed my mind with like 3 sentences. She didn't sign up for that. She signed up for a low risk job, and her job just became a high risk job. She's right, and she has the right to quit. And that's why some of them that aren't quitting, most of them are not, really respect that. When this thing started coming out, I figured I will probably get this. We go into a lot of people's houses that are sick. We're seeing it already. People, it's very likely that most of the fire service will experience this virus. But I signed up for a job that has inherent risks. Now, this isn't a risk that I thought I would be taking, but it's sure, like, I didn't consider it to be, I should maybe quit my job. That wasn't an option on the table. I'm just serving my community. There's some risk involved, and that's okay. We try to mitigate that stuff. But just thinking about those nurses, what they sign up for, not this. And so I understand her point of view, and I kind of got, just with 3 sentences, I got my opinion rearranged. And I'm thinking about jiu-jitsu, and somebody comes in, and they may be wanting to do a self-defense style of martial art, or they want to get in shape, or whatever the reason that we come to the mats. That's why we sign up. And when we are in situations where we're thinking, this isn't why I signed up. If you come to jiu-jitsu to get in good shape, and you find yourself in an MMA class getting black eyes and busted arms and knees or whatever, like, always that student will wonder, like, did I sign up for this? Or especially if they're not having, they haven't changed their reason for being there, which is perfectly acceptable. But that evaluation, what did I sign up for? Not this. And just as coaches and instructors, gym owners, know why your students sign up, and try to provide them with that service if that's the gym that is the best for them. And also know that students, the why they're there, can change as well, and that's awesome. But when you start pushing somebody who's a hobbyist, or somebody who has a full-time job, and they're doing this to have some friends and to work out with their friends and to learn an art form, and you start pushing them to compete, know why they signed up, know what they signed up for. And if you're pushing them to do something they didn't sign up for, they might go somewhere else. They might quit altogether and do something else with their time.
When you were talking about, being a hobbyist and going into the MMA class and getting black eyes, also I kept thinking about, you imagine you show up for your first class, or, your first year, and you're still brand new, and you show up for the competition class, and you get paired with Paul Harris. Like, how brutal would that be?
Yeah, that
would not be. Yeah, that would not be fun at all. It'd lead to me quitting and not being able to walk properly. But, you're going back to talking about, the nurse. This isn't what I signed up for. And, you were talking about when you went to the fire department, you signed up for it. And, I remember talking to you before you went on the fire department, and, you were thinking about it. And that was one of the things you talked to me about, the risk. I just remember you specifically wanting to go to lunch to talk about it. And, so we went to lunch, your favorite spot, McDonald's, and you talked about how you were afraid that you might fall out of a tree while you're getting a cat, and you were a little bit worried about that. So, yeah, I remember you talking about that a long time ago. Kind of neat to bring it back full circle.
Well, thanks, Jerry. I may not remember that conversation, but I will tell you, getting a cat down from a tree is a violent process on the person trying to get the cat. Put on your fire glove, put on your fire coat, and there's a lot of times there's a lot of pee up there. Mostly of the cats.
Done that?
Yeah. Most of the time, the cat, you just say, hey, we're going to give this, some time, and the cat will probably come down. That's the safest way. And then you can check back with them.
Coordinate with the hose.
That's not ideal. I've heard of guys doing that. I've never been part of that, but that
Okay.
it's definitely physically possible to knock a cat out of a tree with the hose. But I've heard stories of that. That's not what I'm looking to do. The cats possess the skills to get down. The old saying that we have is, I've never seen a cat skeleton in a tree. They don't die up there. They come down.
Good one.
So,
or the skeleton falls out later.
Yeah, it just falls apart in pieces.
could be either one.
Yeah. And then with erosion, it gets covered up and it looks like it was just buried underneath the tree.
Yet again, so this twice in this podcast, I've talked about just having my mind changed. One was about the nurse and being upset with her for just quitting her job because it's not what she signed up for. And two was, I always assumed cats didn't die in trees, but Joe he's right. The skeleton would fall out of the tree, and maybe they do die up there. That's depressing, Joe.
They don't die in trees. They die from the impact when they get so exhausted and malnourished that they can't stay in the tree anymore. Man, that's morbid. I'm sorry, guys.
Well, I'm telling
before we go no further, though, I
Drag
just want to
this
say
dead
this.
cat onto the mats, Joe.
No, I'm not dragging it back on the mats yet. We're all pretty humble on this show, but Byron's probably the most humble guy I know. And Byron, I just want to say thank you. And in this time, man, our first responders, anybody that's in an essential job, anybody that's in an essential job right now and has to go out, my hat's off to you. And Byron, you take more risks than most people. You take more risks than Gary and I. We're both essential, but I just go down to the boats and visit with guys, and Gary just goes to the office. But Byron, you take a risk every day, and I appreciate it. Gary, I heard you trying to bump in there and take some credit for being essential, but you and me are a different kind of essential.
Well, thanks, Joe. That I do appreciate that. Speaking of being humble, I've written or made 2 audiobooks about jiu-jitsu.
Speaking of being humble, I've written 2 of the greatest audiobooks known to man.
No, it's I want to tell you about, real quick, for your first year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu audiobook, I walk you through what that year is going to be like, how to get through that year successfully and enjoy your training, and all the way from the beginning of finding the right gym to fitting jiu-jitsu into your schedule to the right techniques, and ending with, if you want to do a tournament, how to do that and have success with that. It's $11.99. It's about 2.5 hours long. You could find it in the shop. There'll be a link to the shop in the show notes, and check it out from there, my friends. It's very similar to a podcast, but it's just me talking to you about your first year of grappling. So, Joe, I'm excited to have the BjJ Campaign guys, Jeff and Phil, on here. So we mostly talk about being a blue belt and our own personal stories. I think it's important to hear some of those because we all have different stories, but you do see common situations and common themes throughout those. So if you're that white belt range, that blue belt range, you'll definitely see pieces of ourselves in your story. And I think these are all interesting stories that we're going to hear during this interview, or this, panel or discussion. What do you call it, Joe? What do you think?
I'd call it a discussion. And I think a little bit it goes back to our quote, in that experience is when you learn from your mistake again. But ideally, we want to learn from other people's experiences. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here, is share our experiences. And hopefully, if you're coming up, that you can learn from them and maybe avoid some mistakes.
All right, let's air the discussion with our friends from BjJ Campaign.
Welcome to episode 78 of the BjJ Campaign podcast. My name is Jeff Boone. I'm an A3 blue belt, 3 stripes.
Phil Kors, a 2 stripes.
And my name is Joe Thomas, and I'm with BjjBrick. And I am an A2H, no stripe, purple belt.
My name is Byron Jabara. I probably am an A2 and 1 stripe black belt.
All right, so we're all here for a conversation, and what we want to talk about is the transitional period between white belt and blue belt, say 3-4 stripe white belt to 2-stripe blue belt. We all know that that's a period of time where we see some dropout. So we're going to talk about that and hopefully get some insight and some advice for both of our listeners. Before we get into that, guys, let's talk about how long were you guys white belts? And yeah, let's start there. How long and when was everybody a white belt?
So, yeah, this is Jeff, and I was a white belt for 13 and a half months. And part of that going from white to blue was that I had a baseline of wrestling. So I wrestled 10 plus years, junior high school, college, and things of that nature. So I already had a baseline in grappling, which I think kind of sped up my progression through white belt to blue.
I was a white belt for 14, 15 months with no background at all. But after about 3 to 4 months, I was going about 5 days a week.
Well, that's a lot. That's a lot of days a week. This is Joe, and I was a white belt between 2004 and 2000. Oh, I don't know, maybe 12. Now, there was a period of time for 4 or 5 years there where I wasn't able to train, but yeah, I had a long white belt period, and I think about 2012 got my blue belt.
Yeah, and this is Byron. I started in 2004. 2002, and I probably was a white belt for around 2 years.
Okay, so, yeah,
give or take. I don't know for sure. Nice.
So, what were we all like as a white belts, and how was things coming together for us as we neared that blue belt level? For me as a white belt, and again, Byron and I both started back a long time ago. The game seemed simpler back then. I was really a closed guard guy for the first couple of years when it comes to guard, and added half guard just before I got my blue belt. That's kind of where things were coming together. I was branching out a little bit, but I was kind of old school. Closed guard, Kimuras, and hip bump sweeps.
That sounds super similar to what I was doing other than the Kimura. I tried a lot of them, but none of them ever worked. I was definitely starting and being on the smaller side. Closed guard kind of was my comfort zone, basically. I tried to do a lot of collar chokes and things like that, but no matter where I was always trying to get back to that because that was where I felt safe.
And it's funny you say the hip bump sweep, Joe, because I remember the first time Phil and I we partnered up from the very first time that he came into class, and I remember one of the first lessons was the hip bump sweep, and right away he did the hip bump sweep. I'm kind of a slow learner, just in full disclosure, but it was interesting because I said, Phil, this is your sweep. And from then on, he was hip bump sweep, and still to this day has a great hip bump sweep, and now great hip bump sweep to guillotine as well.
Man, I love that combination of hip bump and guillotine. It's I still use that all the time. I like that. For myself as a white belt, I kind of sucked. Like just overall, I was trying to play guard because I didn't have a choice. I couldn't get a top game going because I didn't have a good sweep, and I didn't have any. I didn't have much of a wrestling game.
Sounds really familiar.
I think I would have liked to play top game more, but it just didn't happen. I played guard. I would do an arm bar, and my arm bar was bad enough to where they could usually just pull their arm right out pretty easily, and then I would try to triangle the remaining arm. Neither one of them had a ton of success, and they were just me trying things, really.
Byron, that sounds like Phil's game in 2018.
It's a good game to start with because you don't have to, like, if my game would have been, like around getting the back or getting mount or something like that, I would never have got to play my game. I just didn't possess the skills to get to those positions.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about that a lot, and me noticing that I started with closed guard and I seemed to really like it, but I think I really liked it because that was the only place where I had any sort of chance. Like I wasn't taking anybody down, and I was not sweeping anybody. So the closed guard was kind of the only place that felt good for me.
Yeah, and good for you for getting a closed guard. It's hard. It's hard to obtain closed guard a lot of times as well.
Yeah,
that's why I think I like butterfly so much. Is it's hard to block the butterfly guard from happening.
That's true. That's something Jeff and I have been working on recently, looking into a lot of the different butterfly stuff. So that might be the natural progression people kind of tend to want to take.
And that's our move of the month of the week, because we change weekly. We don't change. We're part of that move of the month group that you guys have, but it's like weekly. Our attention shifts from one thing to another.
Yeah, well, if you have a move of the month, man, there's a lot of ways you can break that down. Going back to the closed guard, though, and you guys were talking about moving towards butterfly guard, man, getting one butterfly hook in can just be magic. There's so many sweeps off the, trapping one arm and getting the opposite butterfly hook in and things like that. So that's always been a part of my game, I think, is having closed guard and then getting one butterfly hook in.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I kind of had a different experience as a white belt going through white belt. And that was, and Phil and I have talked about this, and that is that, coming into jiu-jitsu, I weighed 312 pounds. And so within the first 6 months, I lost 60 pounds. Right. And so I had that wrestling background. So I was constantly playing top and not really developing my game on the bottom until like that mid first or second stripe on my white belt. And that's whenever a good friend and training partner of ours said, Jeff, you have to play off of your back. You can't just, you're not good at passing or top. It's just you have the capability of playing it because you have a number of years of wrestling and know what side control is and that sort of thing. And so that was a benefit to me to have that trusted advisor say, hey, man, you need to do nothing but play guard. And that's what I've been doing ever since I was like right after my first stripe on my white belt, is just simply playing guard. And going into those other things like we had the hip bump sweeps, not so much that, but the flower sweep, that's my favorite sweep, and others, and utilizing butterflies we were just talking about.
Man, Jeff, I've always told people nothing makes me happier when looking at the progression of my friends and teammates than when a wrestler starts playing guard. They all come in and they all want to smash. At your size, with your experience, you were that new guy that all the 3 and 4 stripe white belts and new blue belts just probably hated to roll with. But then when you start playing guard, that's like a big point of progression for you.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely was, and it was so funny because the person who told me this, he's a big guy himself, very strong. We always compliment each other that way because, that's a backhanded compliment whenever you're a bigger guy, that you're strong, but he's actually really, really good at jiu-jitsu. And so whenever he told me this, I really took it to heart, and I was like, yeah, and you know what? Now I consider myself a bottom player. We kind of talk about where our game's at today. Man, I'm a butterfly guard, open guard, half guard player, and I love that game.
So I had that as one of the talking points, is kind of at that tail end of the white belt and transitioning through blue belt, what kind of things were coming together for you? Because as a fairly new white belt, you're just learning all the techniques that are taught to you. You're just putting them all in your toolbox and you'll figure it out later. And as you're getting to that blue belt level is when you should be starting to figure it out. And so my question is kind of what kind of things were coming together for you at that point? Byron, do you remember back when you were getting ready for blue belt? And do you think there were certain things that were starting to click, and what were they?
Thinking back to when I was at the top of my white belt time, it was just so much different back then. It was literally, I'm sure it's the same way at some gyms, but I haven't been to one of these gyms in a long time. It was go train, and that's basically fighting on the ground with no punches. Like there wasn't a whole lot of playful training. There wasn't a whole lot of cooperative training. It was, hey, let's roll. I'm going to try my best to submit you the entire time and dominate the situation, and you will too. And if I was rolling with somebody who's better than me, I remember rolling with guys who were just better than me, and I would never get a dominant position on them. I would never escape a bad position on them. It would go, I start my guard, they pass the guard, they get to side control, they get to mount, they submit me over and over again. And as far as what my, like, still the same all through, that was white belt, all into blue belt, the idea of giving somebody something to work with, or maybe, letting them recover a position if they do it properly or something like that. That just wasn't being done. And I'm sure there's gyms that still do that, but I don't think it's a good way to train and learn jiu-jitsu.
Byron, so as a follow-up to that, how, because that's not the way our gym is at all.
Yeah, I would say back in 2002, a lot of gyms were that way. That was the more commonplace.
Sure, but what kept you coming back? Like, how did that?
We're not
that smart. It was fun, and I remember fairly early on. I think maybe it was just like 3 months. A judo black belt came in, and we were doing no-gi, which I was happy for because he wouldn't throw me, and he didn't train with us. He just stopped by to try to beat up some Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys. And he almost choked me unconscious with my T-shirt, and I got out of it, and I armbarred him, and I was like really happy about that. I'm like I felt like jiu-jitsu works, and this guy's been training judo for I don't know how long. He had a black belt. He was a lot more experienced than me, but my armbar worked, and I think that was a big boost as far as like, sure, amongst my peers I'm pretty bad, but amongst other people and some other martial arts, I could hold my own, and I really felt that was a good moment for me, because it was kind of like a just sink or swim type of environment, which I think a lot of people come in and they don't come back. That's how that business model works.
Yeah. Phil,
it doesn't work.
Phil, you asked what keeps people coming back in that model. The truth is, a lot of people didn't keep coming back, and I think as we've seen the way that we train evolve a little bit, I think that's part of why jiu-jitsu has exploded in the last 10 years. 100%.
And I love the quote that when you guys had Rafael Lobato Sr. on, and he said, train 50% for you and 50% for your partner.
I remember
use that quote all the time, and it was unbelievably impactful in my training, and helps guide me in what I do in the future, and knowing, bringing those people who are coming up through the ranks that maybe are less experienced than me, really showing me how to train with them.
Yeah, our professor, John Plyler, always talks about the importance of building good training partners, and like making them into your best training partners is the guy most times that you don't expect or whatever. And I think that applies to that situation really well.
Yeah, Phil, I've always said that you're never the same person 2 days in a row. Every day you wake up, you're a little better at something, or maybe you took a step backwards. I like what you just said. You're either building your training partners or you're breaking them down. After each role, after each class, everybody's either a little better or they're a little bit more broken down. So I think that's a great way to look at it. You're building training partners for your future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back to the training, the other thing that I like that he does a lot is so much positional sparring, and that, like, going back to what you said, Byron, about how if your game was mount, you never would have got to work it. So the positional stuff that gives you the opportunity to figure out those positions that you wouldn't normally be in, especially when you're starting out. That's what made me really like, the back. Not that I was taking anybody's back, but it gave me a goal. It's definitely something to work towards, and the positional gave me that experience. And without it, I would have no idea.
Yeah, that's awesome. And positional sparring is no secret, but back in the day, and I'm sure Joe could attest to this as well, we didn't do that. It was, if you wanted a position, go get it. And we could, so there was techniques, there was drills. So I get guard, I work on my armbar drill, you give me nothing. And then there was rolling. That were the modes of learning. And the idea of positional sparring, I don't recall anybody doing that. early on in jiu-jitsu, and there wasn't a good communication system. We were watching VHS tapes and looking at books as well. So
it's so much different than today. We've got the BJJ Fanatics account and have, tons of those instructionals that we've got at our fingertips at any time. And you can go on YouTube or anything and find content on how to get out of this, or that. It's incredible the amount of information that's out there on jiu-jitsu today. And I'm thankful for it, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. If you would have gone online, because it was around in 2005 when I started I remember going online and you could get these where they'd have 4 or 5 pictures. Like the first picture, the guy's in closed guard. He kind of explains that. Then he sits up in the hip bump position, explains that. And then he gets his grips for the Kimura and explains that. So there was a little bit around, but when YouTube first came out, their algorithms, they wouldn't recognize butterfly guard. You type that in, they wouldn't have a clue. But today you go on YouTube and you type in butterfly guard and there's 50 videos pop up, and a lot of them will be high quality instructionals.
Yeah, for sure. And Joe, I want to ask you kind of a follow-up question to your short stint at white belt, 2004 to 2012. So what contributed to that? I mean, obviously it had to, with your job being a seaman, that's got to be tough to have consistency, right?
Right.
But what was your journey like that 8 years as a white belt,
Well, so there was a long break where there was almost nothing. I trained for about a year and a half, and then I moved. And when I moved, I took a job I was 28 days on a boat and 14 days at home. And back in those days, it was just harder to find schools and harder to find schools that would work with unusual situations like that. So I just couldn't find any place to train. And it was about 2010, I got a job where I was working in Brazil, and that's where I started training again. And even then I'd be in Brazil for a couple months and train, and then home for a month and not train. So it was a long, but by then the internet was pretty well populated with jiu-jitsu material. So that helped a lot. But yeah, that's what it was. A little bit of a break and then some off and on training.
That's got to be really tough to develop a game with kind of that off and on, right? I mean, what was your game like as that 3 or 4 stripe white belt?
Well, like I said, I was mostly closed guard. And right before, this is kind of funny, right before I got my blue belt, the internet was starting to get populated with jiu-jitsu material. And I came across some half guard stuff, and actually from a source that today is considered to be not too reputable. But back in those days, I didn't know nothing, and it helped. And because my training partners, they just opened up a gym in town. This is when I started being able to train when I was home. My training partners didn't have access to this or didn't know where to find it. So I was the only guy in the gym playing half guard. So I had a brief period of time where I felt like a superhero, but that didn't last very long.
They all got used to that quickly, huh?
Yeah. So, thinking back on this, and we've all talked about our own journeys and stuff, but if we were advising guys that are 2, 3, 4 stripes white belts now, what are kind of some crucial things that they need to know or that they need to be doing? I would say one of the things that they need to be doing is not having big gaps or holes in their game. We talk about it on the podcast a lot that everybody should have a couple, maybe 2, 3 moves from each position. So in my mind, that's one of the big things. What do you guys think? If somebody's 3, 4 stripe white belt and they're trying to go over the hump, what are some things they need to be focusing on?
I think the most important thing that I've gotten from talking to a lot of different black belts and people who are a lot smarter than me is it always comes back to consistency. Whatever your training schedule is, whatever you can do consistently over a long stretch, that's what you should do. Just every time I hear a different, really smart black belt talk, they always say the same thing. It's the fundamentals, and it's showing up and practicing those consistently.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is that at 3 or 4 stripes on your white belt, you're going to notice that your upper belts are going to roll with you. They may roll with you a little differently. You're going to notice that your professor is going to roll with you, and he may roll with you differently. What I would say is they're going to give you opportunities in those in those roles, or at least that's what I experienced. And they want to see you go for those things. Like, for example, if they've given you mount, they're also going to give you something else. So if they stick that left arm out there, go for the Americana. Go for it. Don't think it's a trick. That's one of the things. It's like, go for it and see what happens. And Byron, this is a plug for yours, the Nike method. Just do it. I mean, that's what you should be doing as a 3 or 4 stripe white belt, is not worrying about the consequences of what you're trying, but just to try it because you're in a safe training environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's the environment that I didn't have when I was starting off. It was, if I went for this arm lock from mount and didn't get it, I wasn't going to see mount again for the next 3 rolls. Like, this is my one chance to try this. Don't screw it up. And that's not at all the way most people roll these days. Like, I am rolling also to have fun. And if, as a black belt, I'm smashing a white belt or a blue belt or purple belt and just like totally controlling and enforcing my game on this roll, that's really not that fun. I want to have some give and take. And sure, like I want to see your best game as well. Like I want to wade right into that and see. Okay, let's see. So your favorite part is your half guard sweeps. I want to be in your half guard. I want to see what you're gonna do, and see what you have for me there. Because I know as a blue belt, if your best part is your half guard game, that might be closer to purple belt game, and I want to see how that's doing.
Yeah, and another thing I've said before, kind of just realized myself, it's not the best strategic advice probably, but just like go try to do the moves that you think are fun, like the positions you think are fun.
That is really good.
Because our professor John said at one point, he said you don't have to like look for the move that fits you or fits your body type. That move's going to find you, and you're going to find yourself trying to do it, and that's how you get good at it, is by practicing those moves. So even if it's not like in theory the best, like I love pressure passing at 150 pounds, it doesn't always make the most sense, but it's what I like to try to do. And I'm just going to keep beating my head into the wall until I figure it out. So, that's how I keep coming back is I just think it's fun. So,
and at 210 pounds, I'm an outside passer. So go figure.
Well, I know one thing. I've got a lot of training partners that are in that 150, 160, 70 range. And they seem to be able to defy the laws of physics. Pressure passing is as much about technique as it is about the actual force or weight or whatever. So go for it, Phil. You're going to be a great pressure passer one of these days.
One of these days.
Yeah, I'm sure you're well on your way already. So.
If he gets that head and the hip on that over underpass, you're in for a bad time.
There you go. Yeah, you stack a guy enough, and it doesn't take much weight to make that pressure unbearable.
Yep.
Hey guys, when you got your blue belts, tell me a little bit about it. I'll start so that you guys have a time to think about it. I got my blue belt. I was training at a school here in Texas that was not doing very well, and so I contacted the guy that I trained with in Brazil, my professor down there, Luis Paulo, and asked him if there's any ideas he had to help us out. And he said, I'll come up to a seminar. And then I think I got a black belt that would like to come up there and help you run the school. So he came up and did the seminar, and he told me, or he contacted me about 8 weeks before he came and said, how would you like your name? Do you want your full name? What do you want on your blue belt certificate? I was like, oh shit. so you want to talk about the pressure being on, I trained with him for over a year in Brazil and kept in touch with him. So he knew where I was at, and he knew I was ready, but man, I didn't think I was ready. So anyway, man, I worked my ass off, and he came up and we did the, promotion. And at that time it was pretty common. We did a gauntlet, and we did a gauntlet that when I got my purple belt, but under current management, my school doesn't do it anymore. What was you guys' promotion day like? Did you do the gauntlet? How do you feel about it?
So my promotion, it was actually like on a Tuesday night. It was a Tuesday night class. It wasn't a seminar or anything. And it was me and one of my good training partners, Mark Yelton, and we both got promoted to blue belt on the same night. And Phil wasn't there, and I'll still never forgive him for that. I had no idea. It was a complete shock to me. I was a 3-stripe white belt when I got promoted, so I had no reason to believe I'd be promoted that night, and had no idea, like you had that forewarning of 8 weeks that you were getting your blue belt. Looking back on it, when I kind of look back on it, I look back on rolling with our professor and the upper belts and kind of the change in the tone of the roll, right? And that's kind of what I noticed going into it. And so after that, I did do a gauntlet. It was a Tuesday night class, so there was like 25 people there. And being the imbecile that I am, I took my shirt off and did it the old fashioned way. Me and Mark both did. And did it. And I view it as a rite of passage. And I also view it as, if people don't agree with the gauntlet, I don't think anyone makes you do the gauntlet. And so I had no problem with doing it myself, and I'll have no problem doing it again and again. But I do understand if people have objections to it, but I did feel like it was a rite of passage for me.
Yeah, I got my mine it was a promotion seminar, and I wasn't necessarily 100% sure, but I had a feeling because it was just, I had been at 4 stripes for a while, and it just seemed to make sense because it was a promotion seminar. But going back a couple months earlier, this story kind of sort of relates, but me and one of my best training partners now actually started on the same exact day, which I thought was funny looking back on. But there was a promotion seminar earlier, probably 3 months before the one I got my blue belt, and he got promoted to blue belt and I didn't. And at the time, for a couple days, I was kind of bummed out or upset about it. And it's funny looking back now, like, it's, what do those 3 months even mean, basically? But I was kind of bummed out for a couple days. But then, like, you kind of just go right back to class, and it, doesn't really have any effect. Like, when we train, the same stuff happens with the same people. And it was the same way after I actually got the blue belt of I train and the same stuff is happening. I'm doing well with some people and not doing so good with most. So didn't really change anything, but I'm kind of happy I got that belt kind of expectations, disappointment thing, kind of got that out of the way.
And also behind that too, there's all kinds of things you can doubt and have imposter syndrome with moving to blue belt. But the biggest thing that that helped me is that something that you guys said, and that is trust your professor on the promotions. There's reasons for things. Phil was a very active competitor, and to get those couple extra competitions at that higher level of white belt to show him where he was at in that spectrum, I thought was ingenious on his part for allowing that and making that happen. And again, I never had that imposter syndrome because I always trusted our professor. And part of that was from your guys' black belt episode. I don't know if you remember, Byron, whenever you asked the questions, did you ever regret promoting a blue belt to all those black belts on the show?
Yeah.
It was a great show. And no one in that entire spectrum of black belts, great black belts that you guys interviewed, said that they'd ever regretted promoting someone to blue belt. So, the belts are what they are. I'm not concerned about them, but I also give the respect to my coach in that I trust his judgment. And if he says I'm a blue belt, I'm a blue belt.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's sometimes harder to realize that. It's easy to say somebody else, yeah, he got his blue belt or she got hers, coach says so, that makes sense. But when it's it's you, sometimes it feels different because you, like deep down, you know, man, I got some problems with my game. So that's good. Just, I mean, you are trusting the judgment of your coach. And when I got my blue belt, I trained with a bunch of white belts, some of which had been training for 5 years or around that range, and then one purple belt. That was my that was the room. And so I mean, the problem with us talking about 2002 jiu-jitsu is that's pretty rare. I mean, you have to go to a pretty small town to find a room with one colored belt teaching a bunch of white belts typically. Like that's most of the time there's just better situations to train in. But that's what there was. That was the only gym in town in Wichita, and that's where I trained. And I met I think the first black belt I ever met was Alan Hopkins, and that was maybe at the 1 year mark. And then around 2 years in, Eric Williams, he's a black belt from Houston, Texas, Elite MMA, I think is his gym name. I tried to interview him, haven't got him yet. He just doesn't respond.
Yeah, he does a lot of stuff. He does a lot of stuff with MMA.
Yeah.
Because one of our buddies that was on our show, Andrew Faraday, he does the Fight Game series, and he interviewed him for that. So yeah, he's really, really good.
Yeah, he was a really neat person, and I would love to interview him. I just don't I just need to call the gym, I think, because I'm not the most aggressive guy that seeks interviews. If I send you a message on Facebook, you don't answer. I send you an email, you don't answer. I leave people alone. But so he came, and it was, I think he taught it. I could be mixing this up a little bit, but I think he taught a seminar, and then I think we did a belt test. And the test had basically two parts. He said, show me your guard sweeps. Show me your mount attacks. And like he just we kind of went through things because he did not know me. My pro belt instructor knew me and recommended me for a belt, but he walked into town a day or two ago and was trying to figure out where I was on this scale of blue belt or white belt. And then so we showed a bunch of techniques, and then he paired us up with as close as he could. He put the two guys that were always smashing me together and had them roll. He goes, you guys roll hard. He goes, if I feel like you're not rolling hard and you're letting each other do techniques, I'm not going to like it. And so they went after it. And then he paired me up with Gary and said, same thing, roll hard. I want to see what you can do. And we tried so hard to submit each other and just murder. It was, I'm sure it looked terrible, but the effort was there. And but two white belts trying to kill each other, and at the end of the day, I didn't know how it went, and he lined us all up. There's only like 7 of us probably, and he started talking to each one of us individually. And I remember when he got to me, so I'm sitting there with my white belt on, and he told me, "You got some serious problems with your game." Oh man. He says he commented. I remember when I did my technique portion, I did the arm bar, which was my top 2 technique, arm bar then triangle. And the problem with my arm bar, my hips were so low to the ground that they would pull their elbow out, which led to my triangle, but it was a terrible arm bar. I didn't realize that. I would throw my leg over and hip into as hard as I could. So he said, during the technique portion, he told me, stop doing the arm bar. That's not right. I'm like, man, that's my best thing. So he told me, you have some serious holes or problems with your game. My arm bar wasn't any good, and my half guard, I don't know what I was doing in half guard. It was really just that half guard in 2004-ish time range. I think it was. Not really. We really didn't understand the underhook, which is a major part of a half guard.
Yeah.
Which seems ridiculous, but that's just no video, no. I don't know if you can go back and find a book back in that time that talked about half guard and underhooks. Like it, I didn't understand it. I would try my half guard was literally you're halfway to passing my guard. That was it.
It's half mount.
Yeah.
back in those days, if I tried to play half guard, I was just half mounted.
So he told me all that stuff. I'm like, well, I ain't getting my blue belt. And then he handed me my blue belt and told my coach, work with him on these things. And that was, I had a little bit of that, like I didn't feel good about it, but You know, you put the belt on, and back in the day, you just fight extra hard.
That's awesome.
So guys, we've touched a little bit on the imposter syndrome. We're past where we've got our blue belts. Any of y'all deal with the blue belt blues? I know Phil, Jeff, you guys are still in your blue belt journey. Byron, how about you? Did you have the blue belt blues at any point?
I can't remember that. I think the blue belt blues hit. From my memory, is not that good. It's been a couple of years, but I think the blue belt blues typically hits almost immediately. It feels like you crossed the finish line and you've accomplished something, and then you go back to roll, and all the good white belts are still good white belts, and you're not necessarily a good blue belt yet, you know, and all the blue belts are basically rolling like you were when you're white belt. They're a little bit better. And it's just kind of, it could be a little bit of a demotivating thing. So if you can get past those few months of training and just accept kind of what's going on in your jiu-jitsu, I think that's kind of where the blues hit. They don't hit that I've noticed, you know, mid to late blue belt. I think it happens pretty early on.
You know, that's go ahead, Phil.
That was my pretty much experience. Exactly. I wouldn't say I had the blues where I was considering quitting at any point, and I was still going very consistently, but it was definitely frustrating for a while right after I got my blue belt, in the fact that I kind of came to the realization I couldn't get on top at any point. Like, I couldn't sweep, I couldn't take people down, and new people, if they came in and had like 50, 60 pounds on me, it was super tough, even if they don't really know what they're doing, just dealing with somebody that big. So that definitely got frustrating for a while, but man, grinding through it really is worth it. If you can kind of get through that and then kind of get back to having fun. And once you figure a couple of things out, it really, really fixes those blues.
Yeah, and whenever I was going through that period of just being promoted, you know, a lot of people feel like there's a target on their back and everything like that. I never felt that way. I mean, my experience has always been really positive. You know, maybe it's the difference in size. I never had that. I never had that fear of a wrestler that was a big guy, someone like myself coming in and being really tough to deal with. And so I stayed consistent, but I know it's a real thing. I mean, I talked to some good buddies of mine about this before we were going to do this podcast, and they said, you know, that that the upper belts would really turn it up on them after they got their blue belt, which, you know what, they should turn it up a little bit and make sure that they're getting that blue belt experience. I mean, you know, part of being a kind of, well, my impression of part of being early on in your blue belt is that you have to get smashed some, because guess what? As a white belt, it's still acceptable to tap to pressure, right? I mean, nobody debates that. But as a blue belt, it's not acceptable. You know?
Don't get me started on that one.
No,
I can debate you on that.
What's that?
I said, don't get me started on pressure. I debate my coach on pressure all the time.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Is your coach Jake Fox?
Yes.
Yeah, that guy knows how to put pressure on Jeff. Just trust.
No. I get that. I get that, but and to Byron, I'm talking in a general sense. You know, blue belt to blue belt, or not somebody who. I mean, I get it. Those people who, you know, they get the finger in the armpit, they pull you, you know, kind of roll you up and pull you into them, and it's like, yeah, this is terrible. And you don't want to be there, but in general, 90% of the time, you're not going to tap the pressure, right? I mean, it might happen occasionally here and there, but I feel like you have to know what that pressure is, even early on in your blue belt cycle, right? You've got to feel what that means, and otherwise, you're not getting that full experience. And I'm not saying for doing it the whole round or anything like that, but really, you know. You do the upper belts. A, they have to ramp it up to, you know, kind of stay ahead of the curve, and B, to see where you're at.
Yeah. I remember the first time I felt real pressure. I think I was a brown belt or maybe late purple belt, and I was rolling with Renato Tavares, who weighs maybe 145, maybe 150, very short, very, very strong, but not heavy. And he was smashing me from mount or side control. And I was confident that somebody was playing a joke on me and they were pushing on his back. Like, what is happening here? Like, I probably had 10 years on the mat, and I was like, what is happening? Like, how is this guy doing this? But my quick pressure thing, because my coach, Jake Fox, he loves tapping people to pressure, and I tell him it's not a real submission.
Full disclosure here. Full disclosure, Phil, Jeff. Jake Fox tapped me about a month ago due to pressure, exhaustion, and suffocation. And I swear to you, I was trying to offer him submissions along the way.
Yeah.
To take
like
them.
Take it, for God's sake.
That Predator meme where he says, just kill me.
My thing with the pressure is, and I argue pressure is not a real submission, is that is I would turn around and say, could this person tap you to pressure? And he would say no. Well, could they tap you with a rear naked choke? He would say yes. Then it's so much attribute dependent or skill dependent. And I don't care. Like, I'm a black belt. Braulio Estima is going to tap me to pressure. Like, if that's what he wants to do, it's going to work. And there's a bunch of black belts or brown belts and purple belts that don't have names that you would recognize that could tap me to pressure. I willingly tap to that. Like, I don't want to get injured doing jiu-jitsu. So if pressure's the thing that's going to injure me, my ribs getting broke or damaged, I try not to and I don't tap a lot to pressure. I can't remember the last time I actually did, but I try not to tap from panic, which is different than pressure. But
that's probably a much better way to say it.
Yeah, I try to get after Jake. It's not a fun training environment to take a blue belt and tap that person to pressure. That was a sucky roll for that blue belt. And Jake he just enjoys it.
Hey, we got to throw out here that Jake runs one of the best gyms around. He's an all-around nice guy.
Yeah, he's a super nice guy. But I don't let him get access to my ribs very easily.
Yeah, that's the half guard is half mounted when you're rolling with a guy like Jake. It's just a miserable position to be in.
I bet.
So I don't even know what I derailed it with the pressure thing, but I say if you want to tap to restart, do it. And if somebody is consistently just smashing you and it's a miserable roll, that reminds me of back when I was a white belt. Like, maybe you should roll with a better training partner and work on your frames and work on getting your hips away a little bit, and then come back to them later on after you had some time to figure out how to deal with it. Because just being stuck with pressure, it's pretty miserable.
And I think you hit the nail on the head too, Byron, with the panic, tapping to panic. And also just noting whenever they have that pressure, say that they're in side control, they have that hand under the armpit and they've got you pulled in and your chin's to the side and it has that bad pressure. If you're doing the right things, putting your arm up, pulling the shoulder down to get a little bit of space, then they ease up. But they want to know that you know the proper ways to kind of inch forward and get out of those tough situations.
Yeah, that's coach doing that. So my wife has had some negative rolls with pressure. So she's got a really good guillotine and a really skinny arm, like her forearm. And she'll see a guy, 190 pounds, fairly new, 2 or 3 months. She will guillotine him almost immediately. And then it's on, because he didn't want to do that again. And then, so she's had several rolls where it's the guy gets her on the ground after being guillotined and tapped right away, and then just pressures her for the remaining time. And she refuses to tap, but she hates jiu-jitsu during those rolls. I'm like, just tap and restart or tap and be done. Like, she won't do it. She's too stubborn. But it's just, there's a place for pressure, and it's not with somebody who is struggling to figure out what's happening in their jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
right.
Agreed. It's especially, I've been in this situation a couple of times where you're rolling with somebody who's much, much larger and they don't really do anything, but you can't get out. And it's kind of just a trapped roll. It's just not very fun.
Let's do jiu-jitsu here, guys. Let's not just lay on me and smash me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very, very fun, and it's not very productive either. This is kind of an oddball topic, but we're talking about transitioning through the ranks. Guys, how important is it to compete? I don't know if you guys think it's necessary, if you encourage it. I've always kind of felt that it's a good idea to compete at least once at each belt rank. And I haven't competed yet at purple, so maybe that's why I'm stagnating. But how do you guys feel about that?
I personally love competing. Like, our school is not a big competition school, but they definitely support you if you want to do it. That's a big motivating factor for me in getting better and pushing myself is competition. I personally think everybody should do it at least once, no matter when you do it, just because that is such a different experience of jiu-jitsu. And no matter how hard you train, like, nobody's coming at you the same way that they will in a competition. Even if you're only doing it for self-defense purposes, nobody in class is going to grab you that same way. And it gives you that adrenaline dump, and you will get just a different look at how your jiu-jitsu is under stress, because that's when it matters most, in my opinion. So I find it personally very important. I don't think people need to do it all the time necessarily, but I just really think it would be good for everybody to at least try it to see what it is like.
Yeah, I think your points about the adrenaline jump and how your jiu-jitsu performs under pressure are key. Jeff, what do you think?
I'm along the same line of thinking as you, Joe. So I agree you should compete every belt level. I have. I'm going to continue to. Phil and I are actually doing Master Worlds this year if they have it. But I think it's just an important part of development, because inevitably, the great thing is you're playing your A game in competition. In the gym, until I'm in competition class, I'm very rarely playing my A game. I play off my back. I play an open guard style, half guard style, sweeping game. And in competition, I strictly stick with my wrestling, takedown, top control, pass, submission. That's my game plan the whole time, which is nothing like I play in the regular class in jiu-jitsu. So, I think that you can learn from where there's holes in your A game, and to see, how developed your B and C game really is. So I think it teaches you a lot and gives you things to work on, if nothing else.
Yeah, good stuff, guys. I like Phil talking about adrenaline and that sort of thing. I think there's definitely something to be said for that. I say go compete. If it's something that's interesting to you, go do it. If you're thinking you'd rather not, that's fine. If you're interested in it but nervous, I like doing stuff that makes me nervous. That's a fun thing to do if something makes you a little nervous. But learning how to control, like if I roll with any blue belt in my gym or white belt or anybody in my gym, none of them are nervous that I'm going to hurt them. I hope not. None of them are having an adrenaline rush. We're just doing some jiu-jitsu. We're just rolling. We're having a good time. Sure, we might be working pretty hard, but they know that their safety is one of the most important things that's going on right now. If they don't understand that, I need a verbal conversation, not just rolling, needs to happen. But like, if I feel that they don't care about my safety, we talk about that too. But they shouldn't be panicking. But when you compete, you match up with somebody who you don't know. They don't know you. You're not going to see them again tomorrow. They're not on your team. I mean, we're all on the same jiu-jitsu team, but they're not. They're not. A lot of those guys or gals don't care about you. Like, they're here to win, and whatever you're going to present to them, they're going to try to solve that and tap you out. And your safety is far from the most important thing on their minds. So even if you just go to compete to see what it's like, you still will get some sort of adrenaline rush. And I haven't competed for quite a while, but I did enjoy doing it back in the day, and I think I did grow quite a bit. But I don't really have a huge desire to compete. I might when I when I retire from my job, I might pick that up again. But I have to have all my limbs working for my job, so I don't know. It's just not it's also not the most interesting thing for me. I just really enjoy training and getting better at jiu-jitsu. And
Sorry, Byron. Go ahead.
No, you're good. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now with my jiu-jitsu is just to get better and enjoy the process.
Okay, I was going to say, I think that something everybody touched on was the difference in intensity between training rounds and competition rounds. And I remember my first competition in 2005, I got my arm hyperextended in a belly down arm bar pretty good my first or second round. And I remember that was the thing is I knew I was getting submitted and I just couldn't get to the tap quick enough. And things just happen so much quicker and so much more ferociously in a competition round. And I think if nothing else, just to kind of be reminded of that is a good reason for competition. This is completely off the subject, but I also feel that a little bit of MMA training is really good for jiu-jitsu players to be reminded that if you get in a conflict, if you get in an altercation on the street, the other guy's going to throw punches. So how well is your jiu-jitsu going to hold up through punches? But yeah, I think it's important to realize that in a fight, things are going to happen quicker and more violently than they ever will on a training mat.
And Joe, totally agree with you. We actually have a Friday class that deals with the striking with jiu-jitsu so that you're aware of that positional awareness and where you're at in those situations. It's a great class, super fun. You know, the strikes, we don't actually hit each other in the face or anything like that, but we wear gloves and give little love taps and that sort of thing. I think that's a big part of making sure that your jiu-jitsu holds up in a self-defense situation. And the second thing is, when are you going to commit to a competition? Because it sounds like that you've already decided your jiu-jitsu's getting a little bit stagnant right now. It would be great for you to do that. So the best way to do that is to commit to a date for the competition.
Jeff, we didn't invite y'all on this show to hold me accountable for my jiu-jitsu.
Joe, just say this week.
Yeah, this week. If there's a competition in Houston this week, I'm going to be on it. Hey, I really appreciate that. We're joking around. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Nobody's training or doing competitions. But, Jeff, that is on my radar. I need to get a competition scheduled. So, but that's not why we have you on the show.
I know, but I do want to say this because I do feel strongly about competition. And this is, anytime that a white belt walks up and says, "Hey, when is it time to do competition?" I was like, now you're thinking about competition. So now it's time to do it.
I agree.
The one thing with that is sometimes they put so much pressure on themselves when they're still so new at jiu-jitsu, and they go out there and they have a tough time on the competition mats, and that was the last you see them. That's always disappointing when you lose a teammate. Blue belt blues or maybe competition disappointment, that knocks out people too from training long term. And training 3 months, I want to compete. That's cool. Go do the competition, but just know that we still have a lot more work to do on you, and you're going to improve a lot more. So whatever happens out there, best of luck and fight super hard. But we're going to be back here Monday morning or Monday evening, whenever you train, and get to work on what we found out.
Yeah, something key there, Byron, is really trusting your coach. I remember my actual first class I went to, and we did the warm-ups, and then they had some open training, and back then it was more than just open roll, but I wanted to do it. And my coach said, I'm not going to throw you to the wolves, man. Come to a few more classes first. And so that's what I did, and it progressed fine. And I think a good coach is going to tell you the same thing when it comes to competition. So a lot of people might ask us on our podcasts, when should I compete? But your coach is really the right person to ask for that job. And hopefully, if you've got a big flaw in your game or there's something that's going to put you in a dangerous spot if you compete, he's going to tell you to wait till the next competition. And your coach is a great resource for that.
Yeah, I felt super lucky because I had, the coach that I have. And when he told me, if you're thinking about doing it, he recommends doing it earlier.
Yeah.
Because it's the competition experience. You got to get that out of the way. And I was the guy who went in pretty much 3 months after rolling. I wanted to do a competition. I went in with zero expectations of winning because I was pretty realistic with myself that, I don't have any takedowns, any sweeps, but I need to do this to get it out of the way. And man, that first competition was a mess. So I was really happy I got it out of the way because then they were rapidly improving after that because I had quite the ugly performance the first time out. But it's a bummer to hear people do bad in a competition and give up. I feel like every time I've lost a competition, it has been so beneficial for me going forward to I got choked with a loop choke in one of my last competitions, and that has brought a lot of awareness to my head position that I've made fun of, having my head down for a long time, but it really brings it to the forefront. Something you've been ignoring when you lose in a competition like that with a couple friends watching or whatever and on video, and then you got to go back and watch it. It's just, losing's been a big beneficial thing for me.
Hashtag Rhino Guard. But the big part of that is losing in competition. That's whenever your teammates pick you up. There's never been a time when somebody lost, even Phil. I was there for Phil's first competition. He lost in spectacular fashion. And I was, I just told him I was proud of him. He got out there and competed, just giving that support to those people that are doing that competition is so important. It makes you grow as a teammate as well.
That's awesome. I think that's something that your coach realizes it happens a lot when the competition doesn't go well, is that Phil doesn't walk off and sit on the bleachers for an hour and then go home, never to be seen again. He's going to get some conversations about, hey, I'm proud of you. I know you're disappointed in your performance, but I'm proud of you stepping up here and doing this, and we'll see you on the mats, the next time we train. That's something to be said about the team you guys have there.
Yeah, I think so too. And we've said it before. Everyone asks, whenever you say you did a competition, first off, nobody really cares but you how you did in the competition.
That's true.
And so they ask, and whatever the answer is like, what if it's I lost every match? They're like, oh, cool, great. And then if it's, well, I won every match and I dominated. Oh, cool, great. Let's move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I lost fast enough to not even get sweaty. Okay, let's
Yeah, done that.
That happens. Like, that's a lot of people's first match is jiu-jitsu happens. It could be 10 seconds of jiu-jitsu. It could be 3 months of training, 10 seconds, it's over. Man, I suck at this. What else can I maybe not maybe what else could do my time other than this? That's but having good support network there is very important.
To go out in 10 seconds. That was my biggest fear competing, was losing in like 10 seconds, and then it happened and I was like, oh, that's not so bad. Got that out of the way. So
awesome.
It's and the hard thing to realize with jiu-jitsu competition, especially when you're new, maybe not, but there's a lot of it you can't control. If your first competition, you get matched up with the person who was almost a blue belt or wrestled their whole life or whatever, you're going to lose that match. Go out there and do your best, but there's almost nothing you could go out. All you can control is your effort and your game plan and like the size of your end of the table. The other side of the mat there is all out of your control. And if there's something that you're not prepared for or something that you don't match up well with, it's just going to be hard to do well. And it's hard for people to understand that sometimes the match is over well before. Like if somebody beats you in a matter of seconds, or like if the match is in linear fashion, as in it goes, they take me down, they pass my guard, they get to side control, they tap me with a choke. That probably would have happened 10 out of 10 times. If I could go from side control to recover my guard and almost get a sweep, like if it's kind of a more of a thing, but if it's just in a straight line right to their progression, there's almost nothing I could have done to stop that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe have a depressing view on competition. But you control your effort, you control how hard you train coming up to it, you control your game plan. Those are all on you. And work with those, and whatever the results are, know that you did your best.
Byron, something I always try and tell new competitors is that 50% of everybody that competes in this tournament is going to lose in their first round.
Mm-hmm.
And you take two things from that. One of them is don't feel bad if you lose. I mean, you went out there, you did your best, you trained hard, you tried to implement your game plan, and you lost. That happened to half the people that entered the tournament. But the other thing I tell people is that means you've got as much business of winning this thing as anybody else does. Half the people are going to lose. Could be you, could be them. You just go out and do your best, and you're going to fall on whichever side you fall on.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Joe.
So speaking of advice, guys, we've been on here for an hour. It's been a great conversation. I thought we'd close with maybe some advice for people going through this portion of their journey. And one thing I did is I put out a post on our private Facebook group page for our Patreon supporters, and I got some feedback, and I thought we'd go through a couple of these real quick. Jamie said one thing that she experienced was it was difficult when other people didn't agree with her promotion. And she went on to talk about counting years on the mat versus counting hours on the mat. And I get the impression that she was one of these that came in and she spent, 4 days a week on the mats. And after a year or two, someone spending 4 days on the weeks, 4 days a week on the mat, as opposed to somebody spending 2, I mean, that's twice as much time. So you're going to progress at different rates. And I want to say that I've seen this happen before. I've seen people congratulate somebody on a promotion with like, wow, you got promoted in X amount of months. That's really unheard of. That's really unusual, but congratulations anyway. Like there's something suspect about your promotion. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but if somebody comes up to you and they feel like they're getting some pushback from other students or people don't agree with their promotion, what do you guys have to say about that?
I think it goes back to trusting your professor. They know what they're doing. And that's the great thing about the mats, they don't lie. So
good point.
If your professor thinks that you deserve that promotion and you've been working for it, I wouldn't worry too much about what another student has to say.
And I would also add to that, I would say that it's if someone does bring that up, I'd be like, well, that's kind of disrespectful to my coach, and ask them, hey, do you trust their judgment? And if so, then drop the subject.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. It's on the coach. It's not on me. They thought I was ready. I would also turn this around and say to any white belts that are listening, there is a definite difference between hours on the mat and days or years on the mat. So if you're looking to sort of turbocharge your training a little bit, add a day a week. I don't advocate burning yourself out. I warn against that. But man, if you got a little bit of extra time, you can add 2 hours a month is what's that? 24 hours a year. And that adds up year after year. So,
and another thing to add to that is something Jeff and I have talked about. And like Jeff makes a goal of his, he's talked about it over and over again, is there's a difference between the person who does 5 reps and there's the person, and then the person who does 10,
Oh,
so
perfect.
Using the hours the right way when you're there is also equally important.
Yeah. That's good. That's a weird thing because it's just kind of unfortunate that a teammate would say, or would look, hey, I'm better than you at this. Why did you get promoted? I would tell the person that's wondering that is that jiu-jitsu, and you guys I think have hit this perfectly. Coach made the call, not me. Like, what do you like? But this is jiu-jitsu it's a team sport, but it's individual as well. We all have different bodies. We all have different abilities. We all have different focuses. We all have different off the mat lives that drastically affect what we could train and, how much we could train and we could be going through personal disasters as well. Like all these things happen. Nobody's jiu-jitsu is the same. So Jeff as a blue belt or Phil as a blue belt or Joe as a blue belt, that's you as a blue belt. That's not me as a blue belt or a purple belt. That's the individual. And if like I'm not very flexible, that affected my performance at all my belt levels. And if somebody is having problems with their game or whatever, like this, it's you as that belt level. So I think that the belts are awarded to the person, and you could be, in theory, with my thought, you could be a blue belt and really never hang with much of the blue belts. I think of people that have a lot of things kind of set against them. They could be suffering from a physical disability, or maybe like their work is so crazy that they don't sleep much, or I don't know what it is. But this is you as a blue belt. This is what your coach feels you are at the blue belt level for yourself. It's not the same for everybody. If you come in young, athletic, and wrestling, that doesn't mean you're going to get your blue belt in 6 months. That might mean that you as a blue belt, you're going to be a really good blue belt, and you're going to have this type of game. I think it's just individual, and there's no reason to have somebody try their best. And I'm a slow learner too. The techniques I've learned and I really learn them well, and I really like them. But if it was more on show me a variety of techniques, I would not be a black belt. I don't have a large library of techniques to pull from. That's just not what I've done with my jiu-jitsu. But if that's how I was being judged, that's not my style. I would be held back. I'd be a purple belt or a brown belt still. Does that make sense at all, that it's an individual belt? Although it's okay, good.
Like Joe was saying earlier, are you better than you were yesterday?
Yeah.
And I would also offer this advice to Jamie, and that is, wear that blue belt with pride. If she's got that imposter syndrome, which many people do, just get over it and know that your coach says this is the right thing, and wear that blue belt with pride, and just move forward and keep training.
I agree. I agree, Jeff. If it's imposter syndrome, then you'll get over that. Trust your coach. And if there really are teammates who are questioning your promotion, that probably reflects more on how they feel about their own jiu-jitsu, like Byron was talking about insecurities and that kind of stuff. So, Jamie, I hope that helped. The next listener we had that chimed in was Gerald, and he had kind of a long post. I'm just going to touch on a couple things he said. He started with, I just got promoted to blue belt as the pandemic went down. So I want to talk a little bit, if you have advice for people, maybe they just got promoted and it's not the pandemic. Maybe they just got promoted and they broke their ankle on a motorcycle accident 2 weeks later, or they just got promoted and summer vacation started and they've got 4 kids between 2nd and 10th grade. For whatever reason, a lot of people get promoted and then they reach a period of time where they can't train. So I have a question for you guys, or looking for your advice to help people get through that. And then he also talked about, he says, a challenge for me is remembering all the moves and all the techniques and piecing them all together. And that can be an enormous thing for people to be worried about at this point in their jiu-jitsu journey. So anybody want to chime in on either one of those?
Sure. Absolutely. So great question. And, I always say this, and you can either make excuses not to do jiu-jitsu, or you can make excuses to do jiu-jitsu. And I choose to do the latter rather than the former. And so even with the pandemic, whether it's getting somebody in your household that's maybe would be interested in just doing some of the techniques, there's plenty of drills, that we just did the arm bar, triangle arm bar, stuff. Our professors doing remote training, so we still can have class in our household with remote Zoom kind of interactive training. So if you have someone in your household who's interested, make an excuse to do jiu-jitsu. And I think that applies to any situation. There's going to be times where it's complicated. You're injured, and you can only do a few little things. Well, that time on the mat, I remember whenever I had a pinched nerve in my neck, and basically my whole right arm was numb. I could have made an excuse to stay off the mat. Some would say maybe I should have. But what I did instead was, while I was getting physical therapy from a jiu-jitsu guy, that I would just do what I could on the mat. And guess what? My half guard from the opposite side got better, because that side that was numb, it would go numb if I laid on my right side, which is my conventional half guard. So I started playing half guard on the left side, and it got better. So that's why I think, it's important to make excuses to do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, do what you can. You might not be able to do jiu-jitsu the way you were last month, but do something. I appreciate that, Jeff.
And all I would add is just the same thing we were talking about earlier: consistency. No matter what the situation is, make the best of it, like everybody else is going to say, and consistently do what you can. If it's twice a week, do jiu-jitsu twice a week.
Yeah. I love Gerald and Jamie on here, man. They're like some of our they're just great listeners and very supportive of the show. And congratulations on your blue belt. I think, Gerald, look at this as when somebody asks you about your blue belt in 10 years, they're going to say this. Remember that COVID-19 thing? That's when I got my blue belt. You just have a story with it. And you could take it and say, what I did was I studied guillotines, or I studied, daily Hiva guard off the mat, and I tried my best to learn some stuff, and I just kind of did an off the mat study because I had no choice. I got, much like how earlier this episode I was studying books and VHS tapes instead of YouTube or anything like, or BJJ Fanatics. Like, you do what you can, and it's unfortunate that you can't hit the mat running with your blue belt, but do your best to do that. And like they're saying, find a way to train, find an excuse to train, find a weakness of your game and work on that. Like me, I already mentioned my flexibility is pretty much a joke. I have hip flexibility. Other than that, I'm not flexible at all. I've been doing yoga every day, which I could not commit to while I was doing jiu-jitsu. I'd rather do jiu-jitsu than yoga. It's so much better. But but now that there's no jiu-jitsu, I've committed to doing yoga every day, and I have gained a ton of flexibility in my hamstrings. It's like, this wasn't that hard to fix. It's kind of reminds me of, like, if you start to lift the weights after like even 20 days or 30 days, it's like, I'm a lot stronger than when I started this. If you've never lifted weights before, I've never really worked on my flexibility before. I went from 0 to maybe 50 or 40, but that's a huge difference. Like gaining some strength is way better than no strength. Gaining some flexibility is way better than where I was before. So, Gerald, if you have a spot like that in your game, whether it's flexibility or strength or cardio, or if you feel like there's a knowledge gap, now's a great time to hit that nail on the head.
Yeah, that's great advice, Byron. Sometimes where we're the weakest, whether it's being physically not very strong or not flexible, those are sometimes the areas where it's easiest to make the most quick improvement. I mean, if you're starting from 0 at anything, you can make a lot of improvement quick. So that's great. We have another listener, Emma, and she's got sort of a couple questions. One of them she answered herself. But her first question had to do with feeling like you don't rate, and in her question it was like you're good in gi but not no gi, or vice versa. I would kind of interpret this to be like feeling like you've got a big hole in your game, like you're good at some things but not good at others. So that's kind of one question. And her other question was had to do with feeling like there's a target on your back, and she kind of answered that question herself, and it had to do with learning how to escape and just keep training and working through it. But anybody have anything on either of those two things?
Yeah, the target on the back, our Professor John had talked about how much of that is really in your own head, because not much has really changed. The belt doesn't do a whole lot. It's not going to fix your problems. You're still the same person. I think a lot of people, I think that was part of my issue at first, definitely, was just putting the pressure on myself. Things I thought I should be able to do were not necessarily anybody else really cared. And then for the gi versus no gi thing, I mean, we talked about that a lot recently because I forever had just no interest in doing no gi, and I would use that class as my day off, basically, and then I would just sit here and talk about how I'm not good at it. Well, I've avoided it, and I've never practiced it, so I don't know why I would expect to be good at it,
Yeah, that's good. And as far as feeling like you don't rate, we've talked about that. You're going to have holes in your game. You're going to be deficient in some areas, and you just systematically keep improving on them. And so, yeah, that's good. We have another listener.
Joe,
yeah,
I would add to that for Emma. I would say if you don't feel like you rate in an overall aspect, that goes back to trusting your coach and not worrying about that. If it goes back to not being able to rate in a certain position, put yourself in that position and get better. Put yourself in that position with new white belts. Put yourself in that position with 2 and 3 stripe white belts, and then you'll start getting better and figuring things out. Then go up the ladder and see where it breaks down and see what you're doing wrong. So, I mean, I think that positionally you just have to put yourself in those situations. And the first contact that I had with Byron and the BjjBrick was whenever you guys were talking about plateaus, and Phil succinctly put, well, it's not a plateau if you've never practiced it before. And I was specifically talking about my triangle was garbage. And
good job, Phil. That's great input.
and he said, so let me get this straight, Jeff. You don't do triangles a lot, and then whenever you first try the triangles, you feel like you're on a plateau because people are doing the Gracie pass and passing your guard and smashing you and all of that. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, you see how that sounds stupid? I'm like, yeah, I do. I do see how that sounds. There isn't that's not a plateau. It's just you learning. It's just you putting yourself in that position where you're deficient. And Byron, you as a black belt, you've noted your deficiencies, and I commend that. And I feel like sure that I'm going to be that way throughout my entire jiu-jitsu campaign. And if I'm not comfortable putting myself in that bad position, then what am I doing it for?
Yeah, and with the that is funny. If you're not doing them, how are you? But it is frustrating because everybody has to know how to escape the triangle choke, and so when you're just learning it, the person you're trying to triangle has likely escaped a lot of these already. So they're bringing, like, you knew how to escape the triangle choke before you know how to do the triangle choke, probably because you started off playing a top game. So they're not that green at starting as you are when you start the attack. They know how to what they should be doing, unless you want to just work on just the brand new people. But it's a little bit frustrating, sure. But with as far as the gi and no gi. Phil, you said you preferred, and I already mixed up, gi over no gi. Is that right?
Yeah,
you take the no gi days as like a day off, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So if you missed a gi day, would you still take the day off, or would you go to a no gi?
I would still take the day off. No, yeah. I would still take that day off, and it's something I've been working on in jiu-jitsu and everywhere else. That if I'm actively avoiding issues, trying to address that, because my excuse for not being good at no-gi or never doing a no-gi competition is kind of lame. Of I'm not good at it. Well, you avoid it, so what do you expect?
I think you'd surprise yourself. They're so similar, unless you're playing a lot of like lapel things and you're super grip reliant. I think within a short amount of time you would say, "Oh, this isn't that bad." For me, I always tell people, just go when you can go. If your gi nights are easier for you to get out of the house and go train, do that. If something comes up and you happen to miss that gi night, you should still go to train. It's just going to be on a no gi night. It's not going to be that bad.
And I actually have, and you're 100% right. The more I do no gi, the more I like it. It was just, it was me avoiding it.
Yeah.
That was the issue.
We do like things we're better at doing. And there's no doubt that if you don't train no gi, that there's people that you would submit wearing the gi, or do handle very well with wearing the gi, take the gi off. They're now a handful. It's like now they're choking me instead. That's frustrating. But the underlying principles of your jiu-jitsu will kind of clean themselves out, and you'll figure that no gi game out pretty quickly, I would guess. That's what I've seen every time. But same thing happens at my gym. You go to a gi training session, and it's full to capacity to where we sometimes have to take turns rolling. Like there's not enough room for everybody to roll, and it's a big gym. And then you go to a no-gi night, and we get half the mat, and the other half the mat of people doing, like a kids class, something like that. Like, how come nobody comes to no-gi night? That's just the way people are. But if I miss, I try to train 2 to 4 times a week, and I just train when I can. And I'm often having to figure out, is this gi or no gi before I leave the house? Doesn't really matter. Yeah. I don't know which one I'm sure I'm worse at gi because I basically play the same game. Like I have thrown away all my lapel chokes. I've thrown away anything where I have to grip a sleeve really well or something like that stuff. I just do the same game all the time, and occasionally I'll throw in a lapel choke or something like that, but I don't do a technical gi game. I just play jiu-jitsu regardless of what you're wearing, and I'm sure that's holding me back in the gi game. But I could work on the same thing all month long.
Mm-hmm.
So it's give and take. And if you want to go compete gi, you got to focus on that. There's definitely area for that too.
Definitely.
Are your guys' gi classes bigger than your no gi classes?
They are, yeah. Right now, our no-gi, and what actually got me back into it is the no-gi was the striking class now that we do. So it's more about clinching, takedowns, striking situations like he was talking about. And the more I was doing it, I was like, this is fun. So I don't know. Now we've incorporated some of it into our personal training after, an open mat or whatever. We'll dedicate some time to just getting experience with no-gi. And it's fun.
You guys talked about doing a little bit of striking and like light striking with groundwork. Talk about tapping to panic instead of pressure. A lot of times you get mad on somebody and just kind of tapping their head a little bit, like in pinning an arm down. People want to quit. People want to tap. It's like 0 damage. Like I'm not hitting you. I'm not slapping you. I'm literally saying I can hit you here, and they want to tap. It's like, take a deep breath and work your jiu-jitsu escape. These punches aren't counting. But that's a panic tap because it's just so foreign to be getting hit for just straight jiu-jitsu people.
And especially if you're doing this for self-defense, you have to know that, and you have to be prepared for that. And it really helps you gain perspective on, kind of what the difference between the sport and the self-defense aspect of jiu-jitsu is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Phil made a good point about y'all's no-gi classes kind of being where the striking is and the MMA is. I think that's pretty consistent in a lot of gyms. So if you're going to a gym and you're primarily a gi player and you hit those classes, but you would like to add wrestling or MMA or be more prepared to do jiu-jitsu under the pressure of strikes and those kind of things, you'll probably find that more prevalent in your no-gi classes.
Yeah, and again, I hate being punched in the face. This class is great for me because it's all about how not to get punched in the face, and nobody's trying to hurt each other, obviously. So I would now definitely recommend giving that a chance because I waited it for a long time. Shouldn't have.
If anybody's seen pictures of Byron and I, you'll understand we're not all that concerned about getting punched in the face.
We have so little we're working with already. We can't lose it.
Yeah. Don't leave Gary out of that, even though he's not here. Don't leave Gary out of that repertoire either.
Well, he claims to be the good-looking one of the bunch, though. So,
well, he does have the glamour shot. So, yeah,
always that. Yep. Hey, guys, we have one more listener to get to here before we wrap it up. And that's Richard, and he's not asking for advice so much as it relates to his own game, but he's asking for how to give advice. And here's what he's asking about. We talked about the target on your back. A lot of times guys get that new blue belt, and even though they were getting tapped by other 3 and 4 stripe white belts before, and it was just part of their cooperative training, now they get the blue belt and they feel like, I can't tap to that guy anymore. I'm a blue belt. For whatever reason, their roles start to become a little bit more of a battle, and maybe sometimes to the detriment. And his question is, how do you explain to new blue belts that you don't have to defend that belt every time you're on the mat? If you were tapping to this 4-stripe white belt 2 weeks ago, a week after your promotion, nothing's really changed. So I don't know if you guys have experienced that in your own game, if you've seen it in other people's game, but if you saw that happening in somebody's game, how would you advise them?
It's the same thing I was saying before about the pressure that's in your own head, target being in your own head. It's this person doesn't really care, and it doesn't lie, or the mat doesn't lie. So just
and if they do care, it's on them, right? It's not on
you're
you.
the only one who cares, and it's up to you to work on it and fix it.
Byron, you're the coach among us. What would you tell somebody in that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that you're on your individual journey. Like, what was Gordon Ryan like 6 months on the mat? Like, I've been here a year. Gordon Ryan's only been here 6 months. I should quit jiu-jitsu. No, that's not real. Like, it was him at 6 months. What was Keenan Cornelius like at 6 months or 1 year versus a guy that was there for 3 years? We all progress differently, and your coaches help you out, but we're all on individual journeys. Some people learn things or pick things up. Some people, it's just like you show them a technique one time and they're pulling it off while they're rolling. I have never been able to do that. That's not me. It has to literally fit perfectly into my game in order for me to do something like that. So it's just everybody's different. And so yeah, that 4-stripe white belt that was occasionally tapping you out when you were also white belt, they're still gonna be occasionally tapping you out when you're a blue belt, if not more. Because like you were talking about that target. Well, now he wants to tap out a blue belt, and that's you. If it's motivating to fight harder, that's fine. But when it comes to your safety, that's you both have that responsibility. But don't let anybody injure you or take the fun out of jiu-jitsu because you've turned into just trying to protect a little cloth around your hips.
Yeah, Byron, I agree with that, and you guys kind of spoke to it, but I would also say, I'm a slow learner when it comes to technique as well. There'll be times where I see a technique like 3 times. It doesn't happen much anymore, but especially whenever I was like a 3-stripe white belt, I would see the technique and I would watch it and I would sit there and then I'd be like, what position did we start from? You're like, I don't even know. I just sit there and watched it intently and I couldn't do it. But then after that technique, so every day, because every day after that fundamentals, you have some sparring time, right? And I always try to incorporate at least one time every one of those techniques into a roll, even if it fails, because I'm terrible at it. Or I'm terribly unfamiliar with it, or I'm just not getting the setup at it. Even if it fails, I'm going to try that at least one time in each of the rolls. And that's just something I do. It's just something that it feels like to me, because I am a slow learner, it helps me to solidify that fundamental movement and that fundamental technique into my game.
I love that. And as a Joe called me coach, as a black belt that sometimes coaches, I love seeing that as well. Like if we're working on triangle chokes, and I go to roll with Phil, and he, let's just say Phil typically is doing his pressure passing stuff, and I could expect him to do that. So I'm getting ready to just work some guard while Phil's pressure passing, and Phil just changed up, pulls guard on me, and it starts working, trying to get a triangle. I am super happy for that. Like yeah, let's do this. Mm-hmm. Let's see how this works out. Yeah. Like as a coach or somebody who's got a little more time on the mats, I love seeing that. And I know that his triangle is not going to be perfect because we just worked on this today.
No,
I'm just using triangle as an example. But whatever the technique that we work today that he's jumping right on, I love that. And we're going to spend some time there. And I don't know, I like what you said there, Jeff, about try the technique, try one of them at least, and try to get that in, because like we were talking about earlier, do stuff that's fun. If you pull it off, that becomes more fun.
Definitely does.
Yeah, and you might actually find out that you have a predilection to that technique, Yeah.
One of the cool things about a lot of how our sparring classes will go a lot of times after fundamental classes, it can be positional, and it's kind of encouraged, hey, this is what we just worked on in class from this position. This would be a good idea to try it out. This is how you get to see how, does it work, basically.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know we're kind of getting towards the end of this, and Joe's been doing everything, but I got a question for you guys about your coach. A lot of times you'll talk about, coach says, you feel like you have the target on your back. Coach will say this, coach will do this. I think that's a great thing your coach is doing there, and having conversations about the team or about jiu-jitsu, about your progression, whatever, with the team versus kind of the old style of jiu-jitsu. We come in, we warm up, we do some technique, we roll, we say goodbye, and next time. At some point in time, having a even a 30-second to a 2 or 3 minute conversation about, hey guys, it's really important to remember that you both should be benefiting from this role. Hey guys, I just want you to think about, especially you new blue belts out there, you might feel like some of these roles are harder than you thought they'd be. You know, it's just a blue belt. It doesn't change how you roll. It's just a piece of material. Like, when does your coach have these conversations? Is it on a regular basis? Is it when they're needed? When do you feel like your coach is taking the non-technical side of jiu-jitsu and teaching the kind of the mental side of jiu-jitsu, if that makes sense? How often
I think
is
he
that?
does it. I think he does it more often than I realize when he's teaching techniques. He'll kind of maybe give a background of a situation or what you should be thinking when you're trying to do it. I think I miss a lot of those, and then I think I see him later on sometimes. Kind of hard to give a specific example of that, but he'll talk about with the stack pass. It's a guy has the triangle and you're stacking. It's the mental. It's a lot of it's going to come down to who quits first. And if you're the guy on top and you have the stack pass and you back up and hesitate or second guess yourself, then the guy with the triangle has a lot better chance of winning that position. But he talks about those things a lot. Well, he teaches techniques. We are lucky enough to have one that after class he'll just talk to us. He always asks if we have any questions after sparring. I usually have 4 to 10. And also I'm lucky enough to be able to do this podcast where he's agreed to come on twice, and he just says a lot of things that I think are pretty smart. So
yeah, we're really lucky to have John Plyler as our professor. I mean, I know there's jiu-jitsu everywhere, but we really feel lucky for that. And he does share freely of his time. He wants to see us develop as people, as jiu-jiteros, and he regularly has those conversations when he sees that we're struggling a bit in situations.
Nice. That was a good question, Byron.
Thanks, Joe.
Good.
That's very kind of you. I've had a blast. This has been fun.
I have had a good time. Do you guys have anything to add before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I do. First off, Joe, thanks for inviting us on. Part of the inspiration for the BjJ Campaign podcast comes from BjjBrick Podcast, and I've listened to you guys for years, as long as I've been doing jiu-jitsu, and it's a tremendous honor for me in particular to come on and really share this time with you guys, because so much of my campaign has been molded by the advice of you guys and by the advice of the greats that you have on the show, and we aspire to help out in whatever little way we can with people's journey through jiu-jitsu. So thank you guys for that.
I gotta
really quick.
I gotta ask Jeff something before you go, Phil. Jeff, a guy making it to blue belt and having no concept of what visualization is all about. I mean, can you imagine that happen?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about concepts next.
Little inside joke there that I'm sure Jeff and especially Phil didn't know I was going to drop on y'all. Go ahead, Phil.
No, I take the slow learner cake. I think I have to do everything the hardest way possible. But it does feel good once you figure it out. But no, I just wanted to add on to what Jeff said, that going back to before I got the blue belt, listening to that episode that Jeff referenced before about what it took for them to give it what they look for in blue belts and if they regret it and all that stuff. Before I got my blue belt, that made a huge impact on me and what I was trying to do. And that's one of my favorite podcast episodes of any podcast out there. That was really important to me at the time that I heard it. So thank you guys for what you do.
Absolutely. You guys are doing a fabulous job. I personally, I don't know if Byron and Gary listen to as many podcasts as I do, but I seek them out and I listen to them, and I've been checking you all out lately. You guys are doing great. Byron, you have anything to add before we wrap it up? This
has been great talking with you guys and learning about you and learning a little bit from you there as well. Like, we are kind of cheating the system because we get to talk to so many people. Like, you get to interview your coach, you get to interview, talk to whoever you want, or, just by having these conversations, I think it does help us with jiu-jitsu, which seems kind of crazy because it's a very physical thing and it's on the mats, but just by like Rafael Lovato Sr. Now, hey, I should be training half for this other person. That just improved everybody's jiu-jitsu who's seeking that, like the whole team. Mm-hmm. And it is just something that you just heard on a thing. And you guys keep talking about that Blue Belt episode. That I'm glad you guys really liked it. That was a killer for me. That was hard to I had to like picking the getting the people and it was just like so much work wrapped up into a short amount of actual, I think it was fairly long, but it was a lot of work. And that labor, I'm glad you guys have gained from that.
It's super appreciated. It made a big impact on me when I listened to it when I did.
And also we kind of got one of our episodes where we asked a bunch of really good black belts, including world champ Joao Miao and many others, very similar questions in the same vein that you asked the blue belt questions. And you're right, Byron, it was harder to put together, but we were luckily we were at a super fight and all those people were available.
Oh, nice.
We kind of got it there, because we already scoped out and said, hey, we want to do an episode like this that actually focuses on the best advice that you've ever gotten or given, which is kind of the same question, to be quite honest. But it was really good and it inspired us to do that episode. And it was tougher, but it was also a lot of fun. And one of our most downloaded episodes was that black belt episode.
That's awesome. That's good to hear.
Nice.
This is kind of double airing. If you're listening to this on the BjjBrick Podcast, where are they going to find you guys?
BjJ Campaign Podcast. It's on Apple, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, all the places you can find your podcast. Also on YouTube if you want. It's just the audio though.
What are they going to find? Yeah, that's the same thing. I'm too ugly. So kind of obviously it's about jiu-jitsu. What should they expect when they show up to check out the podcast?
Well, I think we said it before, but we really don't know much about jiu-jitsu. We're not really experts on anything in general, but what we do have and like is talking about jiu-jitsu, and we're always willing to learn. So like what they're going to see is basically how we're learning, what we're going through, the tutorials that we're doing, maybe some bad explanations of positions that I do and Phil makes fun of me for, just a fun weekly show. It's about 45 minutes each episode. And we just talk about the struggles that we have with jiu-jitsu and you know what, even some of the successes, even though they're few and far between.
Byron, and where can they find the BjJ Brick? You got anything on that?
BjjBrick.com is the website, and then anywhere you can find a podcast, it should pop up. We also have a YouTube channel. It's also audio. I think YouTube is nice because it just kind of preserves it. Like if my hosting thing goes away, I still have all these on YouTube. Nobody really is watching a podcast on YouTube, even if you're like the big ones like Joe Rogan, people hit play and then it plays in the background. Nobody's watched. Maybe I'm wrong. I couldn't believe if I'm sitting here watching people talk for an hour or 2 hours straight. Like I'm going to find something else to do with my eyes. Podcasting is such an audio thing, which I'm lucky because guys like me and Joe aren't the best to look at anyway. But yeah.
Don't sell yourself short, guys. I've seen you guys. You're handsome gentlemen.
Can I get some glasses? Just BjjBrick.com. Also a weekly show. And sometimes we have guests on like today. Sometimes we'll have just an episode about a topic. We kind of do a few different things, but we do like to have fun and try to keep try to give a little bit of advice and try to share some of the hard things sometimes about jiu-jitsu as well, because I know that there are tough days out there. It's not all easy, but just our goal is to keep you on the mats and get you through some of those tough times.
It's awesome.
I should have a better elevator pitch, but I don't.
Man, guys, that was awesome. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate Byron carving out a little time of his day, and I appreciate you guys, Phil and Jeff, for coming on.
Thanks, Joe. We really appreciate it too, man. We could have done this for hours. I mean, this is it was a real honor to talk to you guys and really get the advice and be able to share a little bit of what we have to offer as well.
All right, perfect.
All right, it was great having Phil and Jeff on the BjjBrick podcast. Check them out. Just search BjJ Campaign wherever you find podcasts. You probably have an app that you found this one on, and they'll pop right up. And if you enjoy their the content we had today, you'll probably enjoy their podcast. So it doesn't hurt to have a little bit more jiu-jitsu audio experiences. And they do a great job over there. And yeah, it's fun to collaborate a little bit with somebody that's doing the similar stuff. So, Gary, man, I feel that you were left out of that entire discussion because not only was Gary not there, he still hasn't heard it because we're recording this before he's actually ever had the chance to listen to the discussion we had. But I'll ask you a few of the questions, or maybe Joe will have a few for you, but I've got the notes here because I didn't trash them our way because I found them very, very good. Joe did a great job. So, Joe, to give him full credit.
Now you're trashing Joe because he trashed the his notes already. Yeah.
No, Joe typed up a whole bunch of questions and different topics that we talked about, and he kind of, I don't know if anybody noticed while we're listening, but Joe led this whole thing as far as from our end. He was really organized, and I definitely appreciate that. But one of the things that Joe was asking and we were talking about was frustrations at the blue belt and the white belt time. So, Gary, what frustrated you back in those days?
You know, that I lost all the time. I got to admit, I had an ego. I wanted to win. I didn't go about training the right way. And, I lost a lot. I didn't feel like I made good progress. And, I considered my progress by winning or losing. And, I went about it the wrong way. And by looking at winning or losing, I didn't break stuff down and figure out what I did wrong and, got better. But, ego got in my way.
Do you remember where it was in your progression that you kind of started to train differently and get ahead of that?
Remember when I went back in a couple of weeks ago and I was talking about, talking to Byron and everything, and I was about ready to quit. And I was ready to quit. I changed my style. I quit the gym I was at. I started becoming, like I call, a lone wolf, training where I wanted to, training whenever I wanted to. And that's when everything changed. I stopped looking at it that I was a student at a school and doing what the instructor wanted and going my own way and just turn it into like a pickup basketball game or whatever I wanted to work on with a bunch of friends. And that's really when it stopped being a job for me. Even though I wasn't a teacher, I wasn't having fun. It was a job for me. And just by changing atmospheres, it became fun again. And that's when I realized I wanted to learn. And the only way I'm going to learn is to not worry about winning or losing.
Nice.
So looking back at your experience as a white belt, blue belt, what advice do you have for any of the current white belts and blue belts?
It's just put that ego aside. That was, the biggest thing that hurt me. Put the ego aside, listen to people, listen to more experienced people. But, my biggest thing is have fun, have a smile on your face. This is a hobby. We all have other stuff we're doing. Some people may want to be a professional grappler, professional MMA fighter, and for them it's not a hobby. But I'm talking for somebody who started like me at 35 years old. It's a hobby for me, and if I'm not having fun, I'm not learning. So have fun, take the ego out of it, learn, meet some good people, but above all, have fun.
That's good advice, Gary. Here's one that I'm interested to hear your side, because I answered this question, and it we'll see how our stories match up, because it was quite a while ago that we got our blue belts. I'll just ask you this: how long did we train before we got our blue belts? You think, was it 2 years? Was it 3? What's your guess?
Was it that long? I was thinking it was more like a year.
Was it? I think it was more than a year. So anyway, Gary, tell us your story. The day you got your blue belt, what happened? Because you're involved in mine. I want to hear if I remember wrong or if you remember right or what.
Shoot, I just remember it was a long day. Eric Williams came up from Houston for a seminar, and our instructor John Castillo told me and you and Bronk and Ricky and Corley, and I don't know who else, that we were going to test for our blue belts. And actually, I was probably the worst out of everybody there.
Hey, so, Gary, speaking of that, before you get too far, I know you haven't heard the conversation that we had with the campaign guys, but to this day, Byron still feels like the only reason he got his blue belt is because he whooped your ass that day. Go ahead with your story.
I will tell you, Byron, he would always whoop my ass back then. It was a one-sided affair. So, we had our seminar, and then after the seminar, we went to eat at Subway. And if I remember right, Byron, didn't you buy Eric Williams and Johnny's food, or did I?
I don't remember.
I think you bought one and I bought the other.
Okay.
But
that's believable.
We went to Subway and we came back, and it was time for a test, which, we had to show a whole bunch of different moves. I can't totally remember, but all from different positions. And then based off of our size or skill level, he actually had us roll, like a real match in front of everybody. And me and Byron actually rolled together. And so, we had fun and rolled. And after that, the rest is, we got thrown real quick. And,
I remember
the rest
that.
is history. Yeah.
So Gary, slightly different. I tried to kill you when we were rolling. He told us. Remember, he said, "Don't go easy. Don't give them anything.
I remember you
Fight
whispered
hard."
to me. Yeah, you whispered that to me right before we started.
I thought Eric told us to do that.
Yeah, I remember you said that.
Okay. Well, I tried my best, and because I remember the other guys that got matched up with each other, nobody got any submissions. I'm like, I'm going to submit Gary, and it didn't happen. So that's similar. He told me my half guard was basically garbage, and my best technique, that was an arm bar from the guard. He didn't like that either because I didn't bring my hips off the ground. I throw my leg over your head and just hip into it. He's like, "That's not good. Don't do that." I'm like, "What? That's my best move."
I remember he got mad at me because I was going for heel hooks.
No.
No, but I like it that he was honest. I mean, basically, he told me and you we're flat out garbage. But he was honest. I would rather have that. And but he just didn't say you're flat out garbage. Here's your blue belt. Hey, you guys are flat out garbage. This is what you need to work on.
No, I found him to be very encouraging. He told me I had some weak spots, which was fine. But it was like just having him in the room and having a black belt, that would have been huge. That was really neat. And he's a very cool, interesting person. Only met him a couple of times, but it was a blast having him around, and I felt inspired by his presence and by that process. But yeah, he didn't lie to us. He didn't say, "You guys are awesome blue belts." He's like, "Here's your blue belt. Now you got some work to do."
I'm glad he said that. I'm glad that here's your blue belt. You got a ton of work to do. This is what you need to work on.
So Gary, another question we had during the show, during the part you missed. How did your game change in this blue belt range?
That's a good question. I don't know if it really did much.
What were your favorite techniques?
It was far side armbar off a side control. That's about the only move I could hit with any regularity. That was my move. I was a top control guy there, and I just always worked for top position. I worked for that underhook. I scoop that arm up and take it. That's really about all I did back then. And I still even think at blue belt, I was, when I got my blue belt, I was still too ego driven and not worrying about learning as much as I was worried about winning. I think I was doing it all backwards, and I think it really hurt me.
Yeah, so this is a good point to throw this out there. For some people, you've got your blue belt and you think you've got it all figured out. You don't. And for some people that are like three or four stripe white belts, if your school has stripes, and you think I'll never get my blue belt because I'll never get it figured out, you don't have to have it all figured out to get your blue belt.
Yeah, shoot. I've been training 18 years. I don't have it figured out.
I'm with you, Gary.
Gary, how long after this did you start pursuing footlocks?
Oh, shoot. I've only been doing footlocks for the last, 5 years maybe. No, okay. I didn't. And that's another mistake I made. I always heard two mistakes I made, and I say these are big mistakes that I made. People will tell me footlocks were dangerous, and I believed it, and I stayed away from footlocks. And I also had people tell me there's a lot of injuries in wrestling. Wrestling's not very smart, and you'll hurt yourself. And I believed it. And those were two major mistakes, major holes in my game. Well, I don't know if really early if footlocks were a major hole in my game, but takedowns definitely were. And, when I started doing footlocks, I really started loving the sport. It was just, we'll talk about it in the article of the week, but it just allowed me creativity. It allowed me to do some different stuff to express my jiu-jitsu. And I really liked, really like leg locks. That really made jiu-jitsu more fun to me.
Nice. Gary, we had some questions from listeners, and I think you've probably seen them, but I'm curious to your take on this one. Jamie wrote in, and she said one thing that she experienced was it was difficult because others didn't necessarily agree with her promotion. And she put in there that some people are counting years in the sport versus time on the mat, hours on the mat. So I'm guessing that she was really dedicated and she got her white belt or blue belt a little bit sooner than maybe other people thought was appropriate.
What I would say on that, F what other people think. That's how I do it. Like, who am I to say if you should have your blue belt or, your instructor gives you that. Your instructor, we talk about it all. We've talked about it that, that person, if your instructor feels you should have it. And as me getting in blue belt, I didn't really feel like I had a blue belt. And I know you guys felt the same way, but I don't care what anybody else thinks. If Jake Fox or Byron or you say I deserve this belt, and you guys promote me, hey, cool. You guys have confidence in me. And, I don't know, man. I just think that's, if your school has rumblings like that, that could, lead to some trouble. It's, we should all be there for each other to make each other better and, not trying to hold people back or, talking about people, behind their, well, I don't even know if they did it behind their back, but, it's, let's congratulate each other and, make this room better.
Yeah. Something else I would add that we didn't really touch on the first time we did this, but 5 years after you get your blue belt promotion, nobody's really going to remember anything about that other than you. So, I mean, it's just a small step in a long journey once you're 8 years past it.
Yeah. I'm just, I'm glad Jamie's training, got her blue belt, and like you said, works hard, and, her instructor gave it to her, so she definitely deserves it. And, I hope she just keeps training and going and going and going. So, props to Jamie.
That's good. Anything else, Joe, that you want to throw in there from?
I think that's pretty good. Appreciate you participating, Gary.
No problem. Thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah, we knew we were going to get an interview out of you eventually.
Took a few years.
Now you guys already snuck one in on me before.
Yeah, we did.
Now, I have to admit, when you guys started asking me these questions, I was like, okay, where is this going to go? Are they setting me up again? But, I don't care.
No, yeah. I mean, you have a lot of good information, Gary, and we like you to share that. You're not just the ornery one. You have some good experiences as well, and some bad experiences, which are hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, I want to just give a mention of our Patreon page. If you want to support the podcast, you can do that through Patreon. You can pledge a certain amount per episode. $1 or $2 is pretty common. And at the end of the month, those pledges come due. We really appreciate you guys that are on Patreon. I mail you out a 5-inch BjjBrick gi patch for your support as a token of our appreciation. You're invited to join the private Facebook group. And from there, you could do more stuff kind of behind the scenes, ask some of these questions that Joe was asking today or on this episode. It's kind of a fun way to connect with you guys. Also, a little bit back, you might have noticed that there's been some extra stuff popping up on the podcast feed. Joe and I did a Zoom meeting. That was cool. We might be doing that again in the future. So go like the Facebook page. Maybe you'll see that pop up. Although Facebook doesn't really promote Zoom meetings a ton. But definitely our Patreon supporters will get that notification that, hey, we're going to be doing a Zoom meeting if you want to join us. Ask some questions and interact with us on a meeting like that. That was fun. Had a good time with that, Joe. And if you skip the episode, go check it out. It's kind of a different style of jiu-jitsu episode that we have.
I'm wondering, people will be listening to this episode years, down the road for a few years. But this is being recorded during the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19. And, during this time where there's no jiu-jitsu schools are closing down or shutting their doors for a, time period till this passes. And Zoom is being used a lot to teach classes. Facebook Live. Byron taught Uma Plata today on a Facebook Live along with Becky, which I watched and very informative. I wonder, as we come out of this pandemic, I wonder if, Joe, you and I and Byron were talking beforehand how the technology and stuff in the world is going to change after we come out on the other side of this. I wonder if it's going to be used more in jiu-jitsu too, maybe having a 9:00 class at night just on Zoom and showing some stuff, or is that going to be a way that as a student I could learn easier by let's say on a weekend or a time we don't have class, I call up I send a text to my coach, hey, I'm having trouble with this technical stand-up. And maybe the coach says, hey, let's get on Zoom right now and we can go over it. I just think of just ways that, jiu-jitsu people are think outside the box, think of ways to keep training, think of ways to keep our game sharp and, using this new technology that I think will help students that, we didn't have this opportunity to use any of this stuff for, as long as I've been training. But I do think it'll, put jiu-jitsu training farther ahead, along with regular instruction.
Yeah, I think some of the forward-thinking people have already been doing some of this already. Byron, I'm going to put you on the spot, see if you remember an interview. This was probably 4 years ago. It was before I joined the show.
Oh,
but
my.
You interviewed somebody that had a whole library of techniques, and they had a Zoom type of deal, but it wasn't Zoom. It predated that. But each student would be working on their own thing. And the teacher would say,
yes,
this week I want you to work on move 134 or whatever. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. I don't know for sure who. No, I did an interview with Bruce Hoyer.
I think he was.
And he was
I think
using
the guy was in
Evernote.
South Dakota.
I'm looking on my notes here.
So one of us maybe can come up with an episode number and put it in there. I'll look at it. But anyway, it's just an example of something that was happening 3 or 4 years ago that was already forward thinking and progressive. And I've noticed a lot of schools now are putting their own daily videos up. Summer's doing Zoom meetings. Like Gary said, Byron did one earlier today. I do think that's going to be something we see pretty routinely going forward.
Yeah. How cool would it be to, let's just say I'm having some issues with a move or a drill or something, and, it's Sunday afternoon and I'm thinking about it, and, I text my coach or I text, a student, that I train with, and they're just like, hey, let's get on Zoom or whatever. Let me show you. Let's walk through this. I just think it's it's a great tool we can use to further, our education, further our mind, to get us farther down the road quicker at jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, you're right, Gary. That's it. This is.
Oh yeah, I know I'm right.
This is changing the landscape of how we train at a rate that probably nobody can predict it. And I don't know why coaches, if you're not learning something about teaching or maybe interacting with your students during this process, you probably should. But we do miss the mats. There's no substitute for getting in a room full of your buddies and training.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think about seminars too. Seminars, shoot, you could teach 4 in a weekend with Zoom. It's a little different atmosphere because, you don't get to roll with that guy afterwards, but maybe you charge a little bit less, and shoot, you could have 200 people logging on.
Yeah, just charge like $10 for a 1 hour, troubleshooting type seminar or something.
Think how many people you could have logging on nationwide. Yep. Any school could do it. You could just say, hey, Gordon Ryan's going to come on from 1 to 2, for $10, and he's going to show us, his new.
Now, here's what we need to do. Byron, you need to go back about 2 minutes and edit this. And we need to come up with a platform to make this happen, and we'll facilitate it for a 20% cut.
Not doing it.
I like thinking,
Joe.
No, but another neat thing about what's happening right now is if you've got friends that are teaching other places, like in Brazil or Cyprus or South America, they're doing these Zoom meetings, and you can join in, and it's virtual, cool. But you can actually hang out with and train with people from all over the world right now.
Awesome. It is so cool. That is so neat.
Yep. Hey, way to find the silver lining on that one, Joe. That's really cool. I need to do that. I haven't done that yet.
Yes, I need to as well.
Well, I know we don't want to have everything talk about the virus or not, but you guys still need to be working out. You still need to be doing some sort of training. It won't be the same, obviously, but stay in shape. Stay sweaty, my friends.
And don't forget to shower.
Train hard, train smart, and for now, train 6 feet away. We'll get better. We'll get back to normal soon, guys. We'll see you on the mats.
If you don't shower, people will keep away from you. And that maybe this is time that we don't worry about the shower thing, Gary. Is it valid?
Don't forget to wash your hands. No, washing your hands.
That's good.
Wash your hands, but let those pits stink, man. That'll keep people 6 feet away.
Oh, man.
Actually, probably a good idea.
Thank you for listening. I hope you find the time today to roll. After all, the best way to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.